Christina's on there. I guess maybe or maybe not Hannah will be on. I guess we'll see. So we are ready whenever you are, Taylor. All right, we're live. Welcome everyone to the October 27th, 2023 Policy and Finance Committee. I will now call it to order. We've got, I don't know, actually 6 things on the agenda. Some of them may take a little time, but not too long. A few we can get through pretty quick, I'm hopeful. I guess quickly I'll ask if I have a motion to approve the minutes from June 2023.
Motion made.
I will second that. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. We're going to go ahead and let Whitney sort of jump right into what he wants to tell us real quick, because he's got to be somewhere. He's got like 4 things going on at the same time. So then we'll talk more about the legislative agenda after that, but we'll let him go first.
Thank you, Council Member. Whitney Dameron, contract lobbyist for the City of Topeka. Amanda Stanley and I both spent considerable time in the State House this year and had what I think we'd call a pretty good year with the second and subsequent legislation and the entertainment district legislation, license plate, and got done, I think, about everything we wanted to get done, and bad things didn't advance. So looking into 2024 and kind of looking at the crystal ball, I know the governing body is considering what a legislative agenda might look like, and so I put together a memorandum that talks about some of the issues that would potentially directly impact City of Topeka. Obviously taxes, we saw legislation last session that was proposed to remove sales tax on food. The Senate idea was to also remove it at the city and county level, which would have had a significant impact on local units of government. That did not succeed, but it will come back. And another piece of legislation, the tax legislation that was put into a bill and sent to the governor, would exempt certain properties from having to pay property taxes, and namely health clubs, restaurants, and child care facilities. Pushed forward at the request of some interest out of Wichita. We expect that to be back as well. House and Senate leadership would like to see the state move to a flat tax, income tax, that would potentially have long-term impact on state revenues and could see declining revenues because of that. The state is fortunate right now that it has a pretty good balance, upwards of about $3 billion in unencumbered finances that a lot of people want to spend down. The Kansas Association of Counties' #1 priority for next year is to get the legislature to fund local ad valorem tax reduction fund that has essentially been cast aside for the last about 20 years. Their ask is potentially $50 million of state fund to be put into LAVTR to be distributed to cities and counties for reducing property tax. A noble cause, a noble goal, but House and Senate leadership have indicated that is not their priority. I think we will see efforts to reduce property taxes in the 2024 session, but the legislature, at least Republican leadership, is more inclined to look at a reduction of the statewide mill levy, which is 20 mills to fund schools K through 12, and then there's also a 1.5 mil statewide levy that is used to fund infrastructure for universities and the like. And so buying that down a couple of mills is probably more of interest to leadership because they get credit for doing that as opposed to passing money down to local units of government to try to cut property taxes. You'll also probably see efforts to reduce property taxes for seniors and who knows what else. Last year we saw 30, 40 tax bills and at least half of them made it to the governor's desk and all of them were vetoed. They were in 2 or 3 different packages. and the legislature failed to override any of the governor's vetoes. She probably will continue to exercise her veto authority in 2024. So it remains to be seen if Republicans can override. But that said, with so much money in the state's bank account and in an election year for all House and Senate members, it'd be hard pressed that they actually would leave town again without some kind of a tax bill. So potentially they'll end up having to compromise with the governor. Again, the public-private competition issue will be back. So many of those issues actually passed the House and Senate and were sent to the governor. And so really they don't have to go back through the committee process. They can wait until whatever time during the session and put packages back together of pieces and send them back to the governor. So we'll see how much time and energy they give to hearing these issues once again. Another important issue for the city of Topeka has been homelessness. It is beginning to resonate with other municipalities as well. The city of Wichita is starting to pay attention to it. Certainly Lawrence has had their challenges. Here in about the last 30, 40 days, City Attorney Amanda Stanley, Interim City Manager Neinstead, and I met with Representative Francis Auerkamp from St. Mary's. Francis chairs a committee on welfare reform. He has a one-day hearing scheduled in November on homelessness, and we wanted to get some of his thoughts on his direction, what he would like to see that committee do, although they probably cannot come to any great conclusions, resolutions, or recommendations with a one-day hearing, but it does start the discussion. Chairman Auerkamp indicates his priorities are public safety, followed by protection of business interests, and then third, dealing with the homelessness issue in a broader sense itself. He understands it's extremely complicated, but clearly his direction, his priorities were on public safety and protection of private property interests. Other issues we will see next year that could impact the city: foster care. Obviously, we had a child tragedy in the last 30 days that involved the city of Topeka, not the city itself, but a Topeka issue. The legislature, Republicans have suggested the state needs an Office of Independent Child Advocacy. We'll see if the governor and the legislature can agree on something like that. Also, there's going to be efforts again for Medicaid expansion. That's a tough sell with this legislature. Other issues coming up include child care regulations, economic development and star bonds, election laws, energy and electric rates, and eminent domain. Again, the legislature has a budget surplus. Remains to be seen how they choose to try to spend that next year. One other issue that probably doesn't come into the legislative process, but we have also been working on is the challenges with Polk Quincy and financing that project due to the bid prices that have been coming in for the city. And we've had a constructive discussion with the administration about perhaps getting some assistance on that for the city as well. And we continue to communicate with them and have a target date of getting back together with them in about the next 2 to 4 weeks with some more concrete numbers on what bids look like and the shortfall could be. So happy to invite Amanda to speak as well with what we've done, where we've been, where we're going, and respond to questions.
Amanda, you got anything?
I don't think I have anything further to add, but we are happy to answer any questions you may have. Councilmember Valdivia Alcala. Question?
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions. Thank you for the update, Whitney. First, questions and requests. First, I would request an update either to Policy and Finance Action or to the governing body as a whole after that November 9th meeting with Francis's committee. I was on his panel last year and talked with him at depth about the challenges that we were facing here in Topeka with the unsheltered crisis. I really hope that he is open to having another such panel that is listening to all parties, because we know in so many areas we are at a crisis level, beyond Topeka. The other thing that I would like to know is if someone, city attorney, you, Whitney, could surmise in just a little bit more detail what transpired in that sit-down conversation with Francis.
Sure, Councilwoman, I am happy to do that. So our goal in the meeting was mainly to just listen to the councilman to figure out what as chair his plan was for that November 9th meeting. So we did a lot of listening while also explaining the innovation team that is going on in Topeka and about how this is not just a city-specific issue and it needs all parties at the table. He also explained that part of his goal is to get a good understanding of his committee of mainly just education is what he's wanting that day. And he was talking about the education, the law. So he very kindly allowed us to suggest some names that might understand how the law works and impacts cities. And so Amanda Karnas, Executive Director for the International Municipal Lawyers Association, he has put her on his agenda to explain the law and the impact to cities and make sure that the legislature has a thorough understanding of how what they can do can impact us on the local level.
So with that, was there conversation about the concerns that you have had and some cities have had, which have led to us sitting on this issue for some time about the possible suing and looking at that from an alternative lens, that there are folks out there that have been so fed up with this that, and outside of Kansas, that have pushed for some type of legal recourse because of the lack of public health and safety that this crisis across our country is causing. So it's not just going for the unsheltered folks, ACLU, there's also, things happening where folks are pushing back in neighborhoods saying our public health and safety, our quality of life, but certainly our public health and safety is being compromised with the do-nothing approach.
Yes, I believe that is the focus of the councilman with the legislator with his focus on public safety and business, protecting private business rights.
Okay, the other thing I would ask, is there any nuance being given in these conversations we haven't, I'm gonna use Topeka as an example. We have the nuance of how in low to moderate income communities, we have had more of a challenge with this issue. I'm putting our District 2 up there as a specific example. Low to moderate income community, we have the mission in our district, they've done a good job, we can go on for that, whatever. But that it causes an extra type of burden that it may not on the other side of town, even though we know this crisis is spreading, so that Francis gets an understanding of the nuances behind this. That we have LMI communities, we have upper middle class communities, and where these burdens can have a more intense impact. I want to understand if that's also being presented forward in your conversations, and will it be?
I believe, yeah, certainly we will represent the position of the city of Topeka in the hearing process that is presumed to come about in 2024. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I just want to be clear that nuance is going to be
Yes.
specified, because it puts our LMI districts at a disadvantage. And, okay, and then the other thing is part of this new, or part of the package for 2024, the legislative priorities, and when you're talking about homelessness, does it anticipate that part of this will be, since there is this surplus, requesting additional dollars for what we are dealing with trying to get more affordable housing, trying to come up with a long-range plan for the homeless crisis? I don't know how many other communities, how many other municipalities or counties are doing this, but is there specifically a game plan for that? To ask for additional funding, since we may be one of the first cities in the state to go to the level where we're at right now with trying to find a path forward.
Whitney, I can.
I'm-
So when we go through here in a minute, what we want to move on to the governing body is some of our priorities. I've written down we need to add homelessness to that, and I was gonna ask you and Hannah what we thought that request may look like, and it may be some kind of funding mechanism available to cities specifically for that. So I guess the answer to that question is, yes, we'll talk about that here in a minute as to what we think that should be our ask to the legislature.
Okay, so.
But as of right now, there's nothing at the legislature that's, I mean, outside of this committee talking about homelessness, there's nothing that I'm aware of that exists that they're talking about creating or doing beyond whatever the discussion that interim has on November 9th.
Okay, so, well, thank you for that. And this is gonna be to whoever, because this is still about this, the legislative, agenda. Is it this committee that stakes it out and then we present it to the governing body for a vote? Is that how this usually works?
Yes.
Okay, so then, has there been any, I don't think we've had discussion, what is the possibility of having poverty and a living wage added on here? Because in my opinion, unless we start really taking a hard look and discussing and taking some action when possible to the systemic issues that are creating some of these problems that we have, not all, but some, we're gonna keep throwing money at these issues and hoping and praying that something sticks.
If you would
So
like,
that's a question.
yeah, if you'd like to add something, I'm open to that. I don't know what it would say. Maybe you have an idea. I mean, we can think of something. I mean, I don't mean, I don't mean we can't come up with something, but I don't know if we have a specific sort of request through that we'd like the legislature to look at the issue, whether we want them to take a look at increasing minimum wage at the state level, whatever that looks like.
So I'm looking to work at this collaboratively with this committee. I'm not looking to Lone Ranger this. So I would ask that these two be considered and that we work together to formulate,
Perfect.
a paragraph or two
Yep.
for this. And then the last thing I had is, actually, I think that's the last that I have. I would just hope that moving forward, and I think I've said this before, there's two things that I think that we need to consider when we look at a legislative agenda and how we utilize the services of Whitney. And I know that staff goes, I know that city attorney goes and talks, the mayor goes and talks, et cetera. I have volunteered as a city council person to talk about a number of things. It was actually someone else that was able, not with the city, that was able to get me on to speak on this task, on this panel that Francis had. So what I'm specifically asking is, what is the consideration for, when needed, not at every turn, but when needed, getting council people that are specifically involved with particular aspects of any part of the legislative agenda to come and speak. The other thing is, when we talk about it, doesn't look like there's gonna be any, the legislature is gonna move in any way that's gonna have possibly any relief for property taxes. And we know that across parties, whether you're independent, Republican, or Democrat, we are getting any number of emails, and you see the ire out there about people being taxed out of their homes. So my question would be, what is the possibility of being creative in this process for the upcoming year, since it feels like for so many people, so much more is at stake, that we consider perhaps taking average folks up there, no matter what their party line is, and have them speak about how this property tax crisis is taxing them out of their home.
We can definitely
It's a
put,
question.
we can definitely put that as a note. I guess I would just say that now that I know that you're willing to testify, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that hadn't been relayed to me, but we can always talk with the city manager and Whitney as issues come up and email out people that are volunteered and say, hey, is this a topic that you would be a passionate voice at the Capitol for, and can you make this date work on your calendar? And I think it's always great to have new voices at the Capitol, and it's helpful to it.
Well, I've stated it in a couple of emails, and when Wade was manager as well, I stated it. So, and I don't keep track of Whitney's every move of when y'all go up there because I have other things. But, you know, I would like to be able to give voice for the district, but I also think that there is a collective power that happens when municipalities can work with their citizenry that have expressed frustration, and our hands are tied to some extent, and a way of finding relief and taking some folks up there, I think, is something to consider. So that's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Nager, any questions, comments?
No further questions. I think Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala actually covered a bunch of the stuff that I had questions about, so thank you for doing that. And I support adding to our priorities, talking about living wage. And if we're going to go ahead and go after this problem, let's go ahead and treat those causes. So I think that's a great idea, and I would like to go ahead and work on that as a committee in the time that we have remaining for the year. So thanks again, Whitney. Thank you to the rest of the team for everything you guys are doing on the Capitol, at the Capitol. And thank you, Chair.
All right. I know you got to go, Whitney. One thing to say before I walk. Oh, if you had something else, go ahead. And then I was just going to.
One final comment. I skipped over the fact the Shawnee County delegation will be meeting in the State House on Wednesday, November 29th, to hear from community stakeholders and explain what their legislative agenda is.
What time is that at?
Starts at 9 o'clock. City of Topeka is scheduled for 9:30 a.m.
Okay.
144 South.
Last thing I was going to say, and then we'll, as a committee, go through this real quick, some of these priorities. Last year, the Senate president was not very kind to cities in a lot of ways, publicly, things he said on the record. And he and I have been having that conversation in my other job, but I probably won't happen until early January. But I feel like I know we do a good job of staying in touch with our local delegation. It probably would not hurt us as a city to meet, whether it's just with the Senate president or with a group of the Senate leadership when they get here in January, just to hear from the capital cities folks and maybe help smooth some of his rhetoric over before he begins it again. And
We can do that.
so I just wanted to put that out there. That might help a cause a little bit, or it may not, but at least we try and make the effort. So,
Okay.
all right. Well, thank you, Whitney. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
All right, so what I'm going to do briefly is you have in front of you in your packet last year's resolution of our legislative agenda. I'm going to go through it real quick and take out the stuff we can take out. I'm going to put in the things we just discussed, and then we'll craft some language that we can bring back when we meet again. In the tax and spending home rule's going to stay. In the tax and spending portion, all that can stay. We haven't solved any of those problems yet, sadly. We dealt with common consumption, so I mean, it can go. We've not dealt with abandoned housing or mental health to the degree we, of course, would like. I feel like it can stay. Driver's license, we solved that, knocked that one out. It can go. Docking building and the lab are resolved. I have no idea what the status of the Menninger property issue is, if it needs to stay or not.
I think it probably needs to stay.
Probably. I think they're still working on it, so I'm fine with that. And then broadband, and then I don't know that the ARPA language is relevant anymore, so that could go. So those would be the removals. I think based on our conversation here and a couple things I wanted to float, I do believe, even though, oh, yep,
Chair,
yes.
can we go over that one more time so I'll know what all of them
Yeah,
are?
sorry. So we're going to take out common consumption and driver's licenses under the public safety piece, because those got done. And we're going to take out the docking building and the KDHE lab, because those are resolved issues also. And also number 5, ARPA will get removed because there's no more ARPA funding. Everything else will stay.
Got it.
The additions that I would like to see, and the things that we've mentioned here today, I do think we should go ahead and include the LAVTR issue, partly because it is going to be discussed. There's no reason for us to not support something that's already currently state law. I know the counties are supporting it pretty strongly, so we can show some solidarity with our friends at the county, and certainly ask the legislature for that. There has been a request, and by actually another council member, that we include some support for Medicaid expansion. I think on our end, while there's lots of reasons to maybe expand it, and apparently the recent surveys, the majority of Kansans would like it expanded, I think one of our biggest lenses to support it is through the homelessness issue. I think we have a lot of individuals, and there's gap funding issues when people need treatment and assistance, and there's a lot of other reasons, but specifically to our issues, that they're not getting the treatment because we simply don't have the tool to help get them the funding to keep them in treatment. So just one issue I'd like to throw out for consideration. I would like us to put something in there as it relates to homelessness. I don't know what that language is going to look like yet, but we'll work on it. Amanda and I can craft something and bring it back and give it to you folks, and then also include something on living wage and poverty. And again, we can.
Sarah, one more question.
Yes.
So when we talk about, let's go back to, on page 2 of the old one.
Yep.
That we're keeping in the mental health. The thing that I continue to hear, not only with agencies that are understaffed and underfunded, but I hear it in community, like all the time, and I certainly heard it at the Women League of Voters the other night that you and I were at, is the lack of a state hospital. And what is our range with the legislative agenda and talking about the huge need that we have here in Topeka, that Vallejo, oftentimes can't hire enough workers. We have a shortage of mental health workers. To specifically put in here, if possible, if not, then fine, but still perhaps consider making it a part of our agenda, pushing for the creation of a state hospital. We know that the Shawnee County Jail is, spending something like $18 million to $20 million for an expansion of the jail for 100 beds for SMI, seriously mentally ill folks. That's because the other Larned and Osawatomie either don't have enough beds or overflow or whatever. So what happens is, and we know it's been happening, the criminalization of the mentally ill. Everyone keeps saying, once Menninger's left, once the state hospital closed, once the mental health care started being centered more in communities, that's when this downward spiral slowly started to happen, and now we're seeing that like it's a rabbit hole. So can we talk about what you think about that, what we think about that as a committee?
So I would support adding that to the mental health section, whether we can think of the language, whether we support the state, a redevelopment of a state hospital system, or whatever that may look like, that would be. I know that the Kansas Mental Health Coalition and even the State Hospital Association have started to support that. And a month ago, I was at a meeting listening to the Majority Leader, Chris Croft, talk, and he started talking about that, like, oh, maybe it wasn't so great that we closed all these, and he wasn't there at the time, but he was using the pejorative we as a legislature, closed all those hospitals, and we realize now, because they're starting to hear from cities, what the impact of that is 20 years later. And so, to your point, it's probably timely because it's actually now, a few of them are actually starting to discuss it up there and understand there's an issue.
So which means that can bring more juice to the whole game, right?
Yep. So
Okay.
I think, yeah, I have no objection to coming up with some language we add to that section.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other issues you folks would like to add or that may cover it? We'll get some language. Amanda and I will work on language and email it to you. You guys can review to see if it's kind of in the ballpark of what we've been discussing. And then we can go from there. Any other comments or questions on our legislative agenda? Sound all right with you, Amanda? All right, let's move on to vacant property registration. If you want to comment, you want me to comment, or?
I can do whatever you'd like, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'll say what I think this does, and then Amanda can correct me in all the ways I get it wrong. So this came forward for a couple reasons. These changes are not substantial to the point that we're doing anything major with our vacant property program. What they are is a concern primarily that has arisen from bankers, and the very simplistic and short version, there's always a period of time where they acquire a property but can't actually do anything with said property, and they didn't like that they had to register that, possibly pay fees during that time. They went to the state legislature along with the Realtors and Renters Association and said, we're so unhappy about it. We just want to ban registries all across the state in general, so let's ban them. We met with the bankers and said, wait, we can all fix your issue locally. It's not a big deal. We totally understand your concern. It seems pretty reasonable. So this language is intended to solve that problem. It doesn't get them off the hook in the long term, but it does solve their short-term problem of when they're not legally allowed to do certain things, we shouldn't be quote unquote penalizing them during that period. Does that sound close?
Yeah. I think as some context, the original ordinance was passed during the pandemic, and when you ask, well, who was paying attention? People had lots going on during the pandemic, and this just, during that time period, the bankers didn't realize exactly what we were working on. And so what has come out of these conversations is really productive dialogue, but Kansas is a lien state, and so courts do not recognize the right of preservation like they do in other states where this legislation, these ordinances were initially introduced and pitched from. And so basically, if a bank enters a property before that ownership has transferred in Kansas, they're guilty of trespass. And so they can actually be found to be trespassers. So they don't have the legal rights to do what we were requiring them to do. So they felt very stuck in no man's land of wanting to be good community partners and follow the ordinance, but also knowing that it's illegal for them to follow the ordinance. And so they very much said, can you work with us? And we said, of course, we don't want to ask anybody to do something that's illegal. And so we worked with the Bankers Association's lawyer quite a bit to draft these changes to make sure that it works. And we're happy to answer any questions as we go.
I do want to point out real quick before I get to Councilman Nurga, this does not change or impact any work that has been done or will be done on the changing our culture of property portion. That doesn't impact, I mean, this is really more of a cleanup than it is what I would consider a substantial policy change. I just do want to make that point because I think that's important to note that it's not going to hinder any of those efforts that have been put to hard work the last couple of years.
There is one change to the vacant registry that I want to point out. It was asked for by property maintenance to make it more effective, and I think it will actually help with some of the changing of the culture of property maintenance. Before, we required you to pay a fee when you would register, and people wouldn't register because it cost money. So now the registration will be free. You have no reason not to register your property. It doesn't cost you any money. However, if you continue to not register, then we can assess it as a lien against this property, put it on the back taxes, and fine you a civil penalty for that. The idea being, we want to take away every barrier that people complain about to register. So it doesn't cost you money. Register your property, make sure that we know who it is so that we can make sure it is adequately secured.
Councilmember Nager, then Councilmember Valdivia-Alcala.
Thank you, Chair. So what I'm hearing is that basically what we wanted this ordinance to do, we're cleaning it up now so we can actually do it.
Well, maybe.
Okay.
I do think there's a conversation. I do think the change of the fee will give, I think we can give it a year or so and see how that works. I do think in fact, none of us here were on the council when this was passed, any of the three of us actually. It happened right before we got here. The short history of that is we brought in a third party who did the not best job in the world. They're no longer managing it for the city. I think then I think everyone did the best they could to move it forward. I think we were kind of reaching a point with this where just this me personally sitting back saying, if we're not using it fully, why are we making our staff go through having to do it, right? But if there's value in it, then let's make sure it's being used so that there is value. I think changing the fee gives us a year now to see how it's utilized and if it's really working better. So yes, I'm hoping these changes will get us on a better path to a system that I think everyone's been trying to work through for several years now.
Sounds good. And so my follow-up with that is, as far as the banking community was concerned, they were getting Can you explain that part again? That was the part that I was looking on.
Well, originally they were getting charged during a period of time when it's like legal limbo. I don't really, it's kind of like it's in their possession, but yet they're not allowed to actually do
Yeah.
anything to the property.
Our original ordinance said that the bankers had to register it when it was foreclosed on, but not when the deed was transferred, which is that legal limbo time.
'Cause that can
where
take
the
months.
Property's been foreclosed, but they don't have any legal right to go onto the property. And the ordinance said, but you have to register it and you have to go secure it. But they can't go secure it because it's illegal for them to step foot on it. So they couldn't comply with both state law and the ordinance.
So this will mean that we won't start their ticking clock to possibly penalizing them if they can't register it until they actually can take official legal possession of the property. So, yeah, no, it's a very strange, it makes no sense to anybody, but it is what it is. We're not going to be changing that law process anytime soon.
Awesome, thank you.
Councilmember
Right,
Dibiacola? Yep.
Okay, so that's why all of this language was struck out, because that had to do with a lot of the things that the bankers
Correct.
were tied up in.
Yes.
Okay, and I recall that when I first came on council, that whole thing had already been set up to work with the Florida group. Trout had set it up, and then it all quickly unraveled. So now everything had been in limbo. So I understand that this is basically to help the banking community, but I still have questions in that. Where is the hub going to be? Since we are not third partying this out, this is going to happen within the city, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Who am I talking to?
John Chardine.
Oh, hi, John. Okay. So is there a designated staff person that's going to be doing this, or is this going to be shared among staff, or is this going to be something that the homeowner is going to, or the property owner is going to go in and enter in themselves?
Well, hopefully the property owner will be able to take care of this. And we're working with the county as a group to hopefully get the county to join our group. And when you register a property, when you go pay your taxes, we're hoping they can maybe submit emergency contact information. So when you proceed with paying your taxes, you have to enter this, else you're not allowed, it won't complete the process. So we're working on towards something like that also. It's just not us, this involves the county also.
So this is actually an established collaborative relationship at this point, and you guys are working towards how to handle when the flow of information starts coming for these vacant registries.
Correct. The reason why we're asking for this amendment is because the way it was written originally, we're not getting compliance. Our compliance rate is 25%. That's
I
ridiculous.
get it.
So we're moving toward a one-time registration with no fee attached to it unless they fail to register. And then there's a $250 fee.
And I see that was reduced from 500 to 250.
That's correct.
So, and John, I mean, Director Chardine, you and I go every day almost with dealing with any number of vacant houses, abandoned structures, not secured, blah, blah, blah. We could talk the whole day about it. So what I'm trying to understand is, staff-wise, so if this is going to end up being something that is going to increase staff time when we are, and this is something that needs to occur, I'm not bashing that, it needs to occur. But what I'm wondering is if there is the possibility of an overtaxing to staff as this information starts coming in. Maybe it won't come in as quick as I think it is. Maybe, what I see in the district for the amount of, properties that are so problematic, that would have to be a part of that vacant registry. I don't know, maybe they're just located more in my district, but I'm trying to understand, as you prepare for this, do you see that this is going to take a lot of staff time? to run
Actually,
this?
Councilwoman, I believe this is going to take less staff, because as it's currently written, we're required to go inspect the property at least twice a year. Is that correct, Wendy? Yeah, 2 or 3 times maybe, and especially if they contest it. So we do get contestments filed with us. And if we do that, we have to go out and inspect the property and make sure they comply. And if they don't, we hold them to the fine.
Okay. And this might not be a question for you, it might be more for city attorney. The whole thing where it says, you know, if 30 days, if there is no response or dealing with it, then it will be dealt with by a hearing officer or whatever the case is. I think one thing that I've learned in just the very short time that I've been here is with the changing our culture, the strengthening of the LLC ordinance, the strengthening of the retaliatory eviction ordinance, is that the city is trying to come from the place of, look, enough is enough. Either with the number of, you know, dangerous structures that we have in this city, that the owners oftentimes don't seem to care. Sometimes they do, and they just may be so poor that they can't afford it. You know, multifamily dwellings that are pits that people are living in. So as we come into a more aggressive, proactive approach on this, with this particular one, are the wheels in place for serious execution of the fines and moving through to clear up this issue that we have in this city?
So this would actually go through our administrative side rather than the municipal court side. It's a civil penalty. I think that side is easier than a criminal penalty side because you go to a hearing officer, you meet your standard. If they show up, they show up. If they don't, they don't. You can test it. And then it goes to straight as a lien on your taxes and can be collected as a civil debt. So after 1 year of being as a lien on your taxes, we can simultaneously send it to collections as well. So it's actually probably an easier process to get enforcement on.
Okay, so this is on the civil side and a hearing officer. Like, do we have, the hearing officer is employed by the city?
Yeah, so we have in our code an administrative side that, like, when a building is being condemned, that goes through the administrative side. It is a city employee. It's actually our second municipal court judge. Most of her time, she's a municipal court judge, but on 1 day a week, she's a civil administrative hearing officer and comes to the Holiday Building and does the administrative civil adjudications.
So right now, any idea what her flow is on those, on her hearing officer side? And if we anticipate we're gonna see a lot more movement in that area? I know you can't, I'm not asking for a prediction.
I am just looking at John Chardine because he's probably in front of them more than anyone else, so I will see what.
Right now, we're looking at about 2%. 2% of the folks who were cited for the vacant registries are contesting.
So that's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty low. Okay. And again, I'm coming at this from 2-pronged. Knowing how many issues that we have in community with these abandoned vacant structures, you know, what looks like to me is that a number of owners seem to not care if their properties just stay in disarray. But also knowing how hard staff is working on initiatives like changing our culture and not wanting to stretch us so thin. Because if we get stretched too thin, then that's where I would want to suggest that we need to bring in more staff. And so I just want to put that out there. I think those are the only questions I had. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I didn't have any more questions, so I don't know if there's I guess I would. If we think we're good, I guess I'd make a motion to approve if there's a second and a will to do so. All right, got a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All right. Got one thing off the list. There we go. All right, we will now move on to merchant or private security guard uniform. Find my, what do I do with it? Yeah, okay. Amanda, you want to?
Yeah, I think there is one error. I think this should say introduced by Spencer Duncan instead of interim city manager Richard Neinstadt. But this is an ordinance that was asked for by the chair. And so what this would do, currently in our code, we allow per union contract as well as city code, our police officers to work off-duty employment. If they are working at anywhere other than a private security firm, they can wear their police uniform. So for example, if they are working at Walmart as a security officer employed by Walmart, they are allowed to wear their police uniform. If they arrest someone, they slip into their police powers and are, again, functioning as a City of Topeka employee. I don't know how long back this practice goes, but it's been in our contracts for a very long time. However, if you are working at a private security agency, you're not allowed to wear your police uniform. I think there's very rational purposes for that. You do not want private security guards being confused for police officers, or you don't want non-police officers as security guards wearing uniforms so that people think they're officers, but they're not really. So basically, the rules focus around what a private security agency's cars can look like and what their uniforms can look like. However, their DCF commonly uses Topeka police officers as their security officers through companies, as well as other state agencies, but they cannot wear their police uniforms if they do that. And so this change would allow, if you are working security at a state agencies, to still wear your police uniform.
So this partly has come about because obviously for some off-duty officers, it's pretty decent revenue. Income that they can make, and DCF and some other state agencies were using our police. When this became an issue, I think they've actually lost part of that contract, but have an opportunity to get it back. But it meant we needed to make a change on our end so that they could continue to be employed by the state if they so choose. The chief of police has to approve any of this. All of this stuff is contingent upon, so if they walked in and he said, nope, I don't want you to do this anymore, he would have that authority. So everything else has to be approved by the chief if it's considered off-duty. So this was just a change at this point to give our police officers an opportunity to get that contract back with the state and be able to do some of that off-duty work. That's where it's come from. I think at some point, I'm not going to do it today or muddy the waters. Amanda and I slightly disagree on the first few things she just said, but I totally get it. I would like to see us, but again, not today, take a look at the next level of this, which is a slight expansion of what they can do for a variety of reasons, but we won't get into it today. But this is what I'd call the first small fix we can do that's pretty vanilla for the most part, but gives our officers a chance to go back and do some work with the state of Kansas. That's why it's in front of you. Any questions, concerns, comments? All right. Well, then if possible, I would like to move to approve.
Second?
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No one opposed? All right. So that one passes. All right. Let's get to the fun stuff. Common consumption. As most people are aware, it was the good old city of Topeka who went to the state legislature last year and said, please let us carry more alcohol around our city because we would really like that in certain areas. And many, many other cities across the state said, yes, go Topeka. We will get right behind you, and stood up with us. And the state legislature, it wasn't unanimous, but it was pretty close. Which is pretty amazing on alcohol bills in general at the state level. So we now have authority to create these common consumption areas. And what is in front of you today, which I will let Amanda sort of walk us through a little bit, is what we think, a first stab at what that could look like.
Yes.
I will make one comment. I don't expect us to have to pass this out today. In fact, I think it is important that we have a discussion today, that we look at some opportunities to get additional input from the community, possibly even schedule a listening session at some point here. So just to know, there's no vote today. Will be purely a discussion on this as we try to move it forward here in the next several months.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say, first off, we spent a lot of time listening to both the NOTO as well as the downtown businesses of what their vision of a commons consumption would look like. wanting to make sure that you talk to all of the business owners down in both districts and give them the opportunity to come meet and just list what their concerns are and their fears, or what they envision this to be. And so on page, I guess I'll first start off on page 1, the definitions of common consumption area. Those come from state law. Those are pretty clear that the director means the Department of Revenue. So where we start getting into the city-specific things starts on page 2. And one of the things we heard pretty resoundingly from both the businesses in Noto as well as the businesses downtown is that a common consumption zone is really only going to work if the city of Topeka is the permit holder. The original version that the city of Topeka tried to introduce several years ago, I think before any of you were on the council or I was here, would have had a nonprofit have to be the sponsor of the permit. And you look at somewhere like Noto or downtown, I mean, it becomes very cost prohibitive because you're worried about insurance and you're worried about liability and who's willing to take it on for their other business. However, what we have found is that the city can be the permit holder, and it actually makes a lot of sense. If the city is the permit holder, we have additional liability protections because we have some legislative immunity. That's a legislative policy choice that you did this, as well as we have Tort Claims Act and other things. So it actually makes it a lot easier if the city is the permit holder. And so that is the model that this is drafted after. And so the downtown area would go between Southwest 4th Street, between Southwest Jackson and Southwest Quincy on the north, Southwest 10th between Jackson and Southeast Quincy on the south, Southeast Quincy between Southeast 4th and Southwest 10th Street on the east, and Southwest Jackson between Southwest 4th and Southwest 10th Street. Probably would have been faster for me to say that the descriptions are in there than read them. I apologize. And then the descriptions in Noto are also in the ordinance and available online for any of the public that are watching and would like to see this. But these areas are directly, were picked directly because that is what the businesses in both communities thought would be the right district for a common consumption area. So the next part says that public streets or roadways may be blocked, but they do not have to be. That is the biggest piece that the city of Topeka asked to be changed. So that can really be at the discretion of the city, depending on if it makes sense during a particular event to require them to be blocked, then we can block them. But if it does not, most of the time it does not. If you move on to page 3, that is the hours. This says that common consumption shall only be allowed between the hours of 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 11 a.m. to midnight Friday and Saturday. I think the idea was give consistency of hours across the board so everyone knows when liquor can be consumed under common consumption and when it cannot. It then goes on to say that the city has to apply for the state permit, that this is only in effect if we're granted a state permit, so we would do that. And then it goes down to the specific requirements under state law that we have to have in here, such as in order to participate in the common consumption zone, the premise must be a licensed alcohol and beverage licensed by the Department of Revenue, has to be served in a container that displays the licensee's name, logo, or other identifying mark that's unique to the business. These are all requirements from state law that have to be in here. You can't remove it in a glass container. And then it goes on to the other requirements such as purchase, when you can buy it, when you cannot. And then inappropriate conduct, we wanted to make it very clear that if you're acting inappropriately in our common consumption area, that our officers can remove you from the event or the area for inappropriate conduct or violations of state law. That's important for us too, to make it clear to ABC that we understand we need to enforce laws, and we will do that as we always do as a city. And then that we will comply with all rules and regs from the Department of Revenue. And then the page 5 simply gives the city manager the authority to take all necessary acts to allow us to be the permit holder, execute any documents that we may require. And then finally, we just say that this section A shall not apply if you have a specific special event in that area at that time, then the special event rules would control for that day.
Thank you, Amanda. So I'm going to go through a couple things real quick, just from a practical standpoint. Right now, as this establishes only these areas in downtown or Noto, to our knowledge, there's no other area that needs it or has requested it or desires it at this time. If if it's private property, they don't need us to ever do this. They can get their own license and do whatever they want. So if it's a shopping center, they don't need us if it's all within their own private property to enact these. If another area comes forward at any time, a year from now, 2 years from now, they would just apply with the city. It would then come before the city council for approval, and so that's how that process would work for any other area who wants this designation, and then that conversation would happen at that time as to whether they would be added to a common consumption area. I am one who supports the hours being more wide open than limited. There's lots of conversations about, well, what if it was just on the weekends, or what if it was just when there's events, or every other this or every other that. I think that the concern then becomes with that it creates confusion for everybody. Creates confusion for the places selling it. Wait, is this the third Tuesday of the month? Oh my gosh, I forgot it wasn't. Can I sell on this day? Can I not? It creates confusion for consumers. Wait, is this a day where I can walk around? Is it not? So it's easier to just say, these are the set hours all the time. And, everyone then knows that there's some consistency to that. Makes it a little easier for everybody to enforce, the user, the seller, and our police department. The practical way it works is signs will have to be, once we've created the zone, signs will be set up to establish the end of where those zones are. So if you start to walk past 4th Street, and you'll see a little sign that says, don't go past here. You're leaving the common consumption area. And the cup that's identifiable by cups, so anyone who wants to participate in this will have to give them a cup. The vendors are well aware of that. It's working in other communities. They have no issues with that. That's the identifier for where it was sold. And then outside of that, every other liquor law, street law, traffic law, and all that still applies. Just means they could walk from one of our establishments in one end of downtown and wander over to Evergy Plaza if they wanted to, or back and forth between different places. So that's kind of how it practically is envisioned. Questions, comments from council members? Yep, Councilmember Valdivia-Acala.
Thank you, Chair. So, okay, if they only have cups, then that will be identifiable. So if I'm in one of these establishments in this designated area, and I have a bottle, and I say, give me a Bud in a bottle, I'm not gonna be able to go out and walk around with that in this area. It has to be identifiable cup.
Correct, but they could pour that beer into that cup for you.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that there's not gonna be bottles out there. This is gonna be cups.
Correct.
Okay, and so we're gonna make sure as well with this that, I don't know, it would be us that would be making sure, but that there's the needed trash cans, so we don't start having all kinds of
Well, I know,
riffraff.
yes, I know downtown has trash cans on each street already. I'll be honest, I don't know. I haven't actually gone and looked at what NoDo's trash can. I mean, as many times I've been down there, now that you say that, I've never looked at the NoDo trash can situation. But yes, we can have those conversations with NoDo too. And
Well, and if needed,
Well, they need 'em.
and I know that everybody cares about their properties, I just think that that's something we need to be cognizant of, especially if there might be an event out there that, has quite a few people that would come under this particular ordinance. The other thing is that, I'm definitely supportive of it, and I think it'd be wonderful to have community feedback as we continue on.
yeah, no, that's going to be an
Thank you.
important piece of this before we do it. I do know that there were meetings with, as Amanda said, with business owners already in both these districts to get some initial, are you okay with this? Are you not okay with this? And so that, before this was crafted, and those conversations will still continue as part of that public comment, but this wasn't just made up all out of thin air. There was actually some engagement with the businesses to make sure that they were willing to comply or understood what we were trying to do before we just dropped this on everybody.
Hey, thank you.
Did you have something, Councilmember Nager? Okay. Yeah, my plan would be, now that this is a public document, we've had this discussion, I'll work with Liz and maybe we can schedule some kind of 1 or 2 listening sessions over the next 6 weeks or something, and then maybe either have this, if not by the end of the year, or by January, ready to, so that way businesses know early next year they can start doing this. We can have this by, so that seems like a reasonable timeline, so. And we'll make sure that those listening sessions are staggered. We may have a couple, so one's in the evening, one's in the afternoons. They're not just at times where people can't show up, 8 a.m. or something ridiculous where they can't actually be here to talk to us, so. So we'll work with Liz to get those scheduled, and then between now and then, anyone who's got thoughts on it, let us know. Anything else you wanted to add to that before we move on?
I guess one thing, I will check into the trash cans, Councilwoman Valdivia Akla, but I thought both bid districts, the Noto bid district and the downtown bid district, that trash collection was part of their bid fees, so I will double check.
All right, with that, Richard, your turn. Who doesn't like talking about codes, residential codes, plumbing codes, electrical codes?
With that being said, I appreciate your time to allow me to present a recommendation to adopt the International Residential Code that is published by the International Code Council. As you can see, the city has several codes that we use to facilitate our construction in our community. A lot of the codes are used for residential and commercial. Right now, we're going to be looking at the 2009 Residential Code, and we're just going to adopt chapters 1 through 10, which is most of the building code. We have other codes that we use for the plumbing, mechanical, and electrical portions of the construction process for residential. The governing body has shown an interest in us adopting the most current codes. This also helps us to provide and keep track of the construction industry as it moves along. At the present time, we're with the 2009. Before we move on to the 2021, we had the International Code Council send one of their representatives down to update us from the changes from the 2009 to the 2021. The code updates, it helps us keep track of changing things in the industry, and also helps us to provide a safe and improve the quality of life of our residents in the community. As you can see, if we adopt this code, we will be the first one of the communities that we compare ourselves to have the 2021 residential code, which will put us in the front of the curve. Review. The Board of Building, Fire, and Appeals established a subcommittee to review the residential code. This committee was made up of engineer, construction, general contractors, also, and the city inspectors, and myself. That committee recommended to the board that we adopt the 2021 International Residential Code, and I also recommend that we move forward with the adoption of the code as well. There are some notable changes in the code that I thought I'd mention. The door between the garage and your home is now required to have an automatic closure on it. A lot of times in the garage, that's where your vehicle is parked. Fumes from the vehicle. Also, sometimes that's where the furnace is and the hot water heater, and so you have some fumes coming off of that. So the code is requiring that door automatically shuts to help cut down on those fumes that can get into the residence. There's also now a deck portion of the code. I know it doesn't mean much to you guys, but we had to come up with our own standards for building decks, and so now we don't have to do that. There's one in the code, and everybody can follow along with it. Just an interesting one, I thought, Bluetooth has made it to the smoke detectors. So you can have interconnecting smoke detectors in your house without them having to be hardwired. They can actually be set up like a Bluetooth. And that is my presentation. And if there's any questions or concerns, I can answer them.
I was just going to ask, and as we've updated a lot of these codes over the last year and a half or whatever it's been, and I know probably the answer to this is positive because you've done a good job of working with the industry partners to see what works and doesn't work as you've gone through these updates. But have we had, I mean, what's the response been to the changes we've made in all those other codes to update them? I mean, positive, negative, business as usual? I mean, just as we've updated all these different codes, how's that been? And I'm talking about with the industry itself.
Positive and business as usual. They were expecting it. Last one we did, the electrical code, I think that was one that was really mostly received very well. They were wanting to do that. The electrical code and electrical contractors and inspectors, they're really heavy into that, and so they were wanting. I was actually moving too slow for them to get that done, so they were wanting it done. And as far as the building code goes and the fire code, the industry I haven't heard any negative responses. They mostly want us to keep up with the changes in the construction industry. And when you have codes that are old, they're not keeping up, and they have to go through different things to get things approved. So it's been very positive and business as usual.
Great. Any other questions or comments for Richard? All right, well, thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Then I would make a motion to approve.
Second?
We got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, no objections. All right, I do have another item, but before I do that, is there anyone here who wanted to add anything to anything we've talked about, or throw in any comments, or has any questions, concerns, anything they want to bring to us? Now is your chance. Just jump up there. Don't hold back. It's fine. I'm good either way. Nothing? All right, want to make sure. I do have another.
Chair, I have something
Yes.
for other
Go for it, council member.
items when you're done.
No, go ahead. You can go.
Oh, well, I was just requesting to see, are we meeting in November or December?
I don't know, but yes. I mean, yes, but I don't know the date.
Is that talking out of both sides of your mouth?
No, yeah, well, yes, we will have one more meeting before the year is over. Yes.
Okay, so I am requesting that we bring up a clear, concise, perhaps dialogue driven ARPA update.
Oh, that was my other item. Look at us.
Well,
No, that's good.
I'm sniffing around here trying to figure out what's going on. So I requested an update on where we were with ARPA fund because I've been hearing some chatter in community, and obviously I had wanted to know where we stood with this. And I must say you did. I don't usually listen to the city podcast, but I did hear you with the ARPA podcast, which, bravo, kudos. That was very good. I will also put out there, as the only woman of color on this committee, that I did volunteer myself to be interviewed, which is very unlike me, but I felt as a woman of color on this committee, and so much of that funding so intentional as we pushed it out, that all of this kind of was turning up at the same time. One, to be on the podcast, which Gretchen is making that happen, and India, so I'm grateful for that. But the other thing is to really bring it forward to community, to hear some of the success stories too, to understand what might happen if we don't use all of that money, but also to give what we believe, what I believe is really important, that community and media know that $10 million and how all of these issues that we are looking at increasingly, how that intentional distribution went towards, I think, every single one of those concerns that we have, from mental health to homelessness to childcare, all of that, and bring that back around. Because we need to keep letting folks know that we're moving on things as a city. So
No.
that's my request.
No, I appreciate that, because my concern has been, so yes, that was my other item, was exactly what she said there. We need an update on where we are on the ARPA funding process for those grants. My concern has been, and this really is the no fault of anybody on staff, but the two main people who participated in those meetings are no longer with us, the city manager and the grant writer. They are gone, and they were sort of the head of that process staff-wise as we went through it. So I do have some concerns that while I know that money has been given out, and I know people are, that we need to check that we've gotten the reports we're supposed to be getting from those grantees. Because they were supposed to do, I think, I can't remember if it was quarterly or 3 times, whatever that was. Yeah, here, I'll give you here in a second, Freddie. And then to the council member's other point, we were very clear to all of those groups that this is a ticking clock on these dollars, and that we needed those reports, and that early next year at some point we would be checking in with all of them, because that is use it or lose it money, not just to them, but to us. If they don't use it, we lose it, and the feds take it back, and we aren't going to lose that money. We have other uses it can go to in this community. So yeah, Freddie, if you want to, but yeah, so that update would be great, so we all can make sure if we're not quite caught up, we get caught up, and kind of, yeah, get some updates from some of the grantees to tell us where they're at.
Well, thank you, Chair. Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala. I will be happy to provide a more robust report in the next meeting. One few things that I can mention, at least to you right now, is that at least 61% of all the funds have been distributed. 11 agencies have received 100% of the funded awarded. And out of the 2 tiers, or 2, I would say 2 tiers organizations that we have, or we request for the quarterly report. The first one, 100% of those agencies have provided the report. And for the second one, I believe most of them, except for the few that are just needing a little bit more additional time. We are required to provide to the federal government a quarterly report that has been done and submitted, and that includes all the information from the agencies receiving the awards to the amount, including and the purpose as well, and any additional amendments or changes to their specific budgets. But once again, my department and my team will be happy to provide you with a pretty robust update.
That'd be great. All right, any other items from anybody? No, any other items from staff?
I do have one more, sorry.
No, you're fine. Go for it.
Okay, since we are talking about the issue of poverty and having that hopefully added on as to the legislative agenda, I did want to say that the other day that I did participate in CAC's poverty simulation. Myself and another volunteer headed up the table where we were part of the experience with folks that may not have, come from a background of deep poverty, many of them. And so my table was of predatory lending. And I would say that number one, the CAC, Michael Bell, Shamika, all did a wonderful job, community action. There was a very healthy presentation of city employees there and some directors, which I think was very good. It was good to see some major corporations have representation there. And I believe that even though it was in a very packed, kind of process, it was really eye-opening to a lot of folks. As a single mother for 11 years and having understood very deeply the realm of poverty and what it was to be like to be the working poor, I think that this is something that if more directors within the city, the colleagues that I serve with on council that are not familiar with that realm, it can only help us to understand what many in our city are going through, and that it is not so much a blame game as it is how do we get all hands on deck? How do we really immerse ourselves in this with understanding there is a limited amount. We are not the end all be all in that realm of poverty, but it is something that continues to be so pressing that to me, it just cannot be ignored anymore, and we have to start having those hard conversations. So that's it, I promise, no more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right. Anything else? Going once? All right. Well, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.